Good morning. Welcome back to the Retirement Report. I'm Hank Parrott, your host. All right, we've been talking about we set up the life plan, right? The roadmap, okay, for your basic financials. Now, how do you invest? Okay, and this is one of those areas that's so important because we need to invest in such a way that we're staying ahead of inflation and taxes. And I was referencing taxes inflation rather, in one of those articles, and talking about the difference between CPI and EPI. So the Consumer Price Index, CPIU is usually the way, urban. There's a basket of goods that they're looking at, and that's what that rate of increase in pricing in that basket of goods is what determines what you're going to get with regard to a COLA, cost of living adjustment, on your Social Security benefits, potentially, and this deals with payroll. If you're a federal employee on pensions, that would be the case. Private sector, those pensions do not even go up; they just stay the same. Which is why when you're faced with a decision, by the way, of a lump sum versus a payout, which one's the best one to take, really we're doing an analysis, all right, to determine that prior to making that choice. I help clients with that all the time. This is one of those that's a very big decision. If you're faced with taking a lump sum pension or a pension payout, and it's a dilemma, right? You're thinking, do I take the payout where I've got a guarantee amount of income throughout my lifetime, for my lifetime, and I can get that guaranteed if I'm married for both me and my spouse, right? That's very attractive. It's that security, that reassurance, okay, it's guaranteed, versus a lump sum. What happens if I run out of money, though? What if I take the lump sum and I run out? And then what do? I don't have any income. Whereas if I take the income, what's my risk there? That I might die early, and then all that money that could have been in my family is gone. So it's a dilemma. There are ways, though, that you can accomplish both goals, where you can get a guaranteed income and still retain the lump sum. This is why, again, it's important to do an analysis and find out what your options are and determine on that lump sum, because, like I said, on those, most pensions are just paying you a flat amount. Or if you do get a COLA, it's going to be a small COLA based on that CPIU, and possibly getting reduced in the future by, they might do away with cost of living adjustments, or they may use a different measure, so it could be reduced how much you get. In either case, it's not going to be able to stay up with what we call EPI, or which for retired people, this is where your expenses tend to go, and that number, that inflation number, if you will, is much higher. So these are all considerations when you come into planning, because when you're trying to figure out if you're going to run out of money, that's why the type of planning I do, I'm starting with that roadmap. I get into three worlds later, but right now, starting with that roadmap, when a new client comes in, we want to see, well, what are your expenses? And then do we have enough in these different accounts, and how do we get there? So we want to look at your income and how it's going to go up. Your income in retirement, as well as income pre-retirement as you're getting ready for retirement. And what's your expenses? What are the expenses now? And do we factor in some fund money? What's it going to be in retirement? Assets. What do you have for assets that you're going to be able to pull from in retirement for income, right? To pull income from them. And any liabilities, any debt that we need to take care of. So I refer to it as the three worlds of investing. Let me show you what that looks like. So in the three worlds of investing, we have the safe world. We were covering, right, your operating fund, emergency fund, short-term fund. That's in that safe world. Those are things like, again, bank instruments. Banks, in fact, your savings checking, money markets, CDs, government-issued things, maybe savings bonds, treasuries. Insurance companies have, again, fixed annuities, rather. Now, what's this is safe, protected world, right? This is where we want those first three accounts, our regular checking account, operating fund, we refer to it as, emergency fund, and a short-term fund. Next, we get into, when you look at the bottom left on this graph, okay, what you'll see is that the principal is guaranteed. That's one of the things they all have in common. Interest is guaranteed. There are penalties for early withdrawal, typically. And historically, and this is the big down one, is that historically the rates range between 1 and 3. And as we mentioned earlier, right now that's more like less than 1 to 2% on average. So that's not enough to stay ahead of inflation and taxes, and that's why parking all your money in this type of safe environment is not really going to be a good idea for you. Let's go back to something I want to talk to you about. We can drop that off the screen for a moment. This is an important one when it comes to Social Security. There's a great article here talking about Social Security and the trust funds. I've talked about them before and emphasized the fact that to think of it more as a pay-as-you-go kind of system. We're paying payroll taxes in, right? We have, and what else does Social Security receive for funds? Well, one of those being taxes on your Social Security benefits. That's why when we get into planning, one of the considerations is always how do we minimize taxes, and that includes minimizing taxes on our Social Security benefits. Because as you know, from listening here many times, I've talked about up to, anywhere from 50 to 85% of your Social Security benefits can be counted as taxable income depending on what other income you have. And it's taxed at ordinary income tax rate. There's no tax breaks on it, other than the big one being, of course, that depending on the amount, at least only up to 85%. So the maximum 85%, so at least 15% is not subject to that. This consideration comes in here. When you're planning on income in retirement, I've talked about tax efficient income. This is one of those areas we get into both with regard to how you invest and how you take money from different accounts in retirement and how you treat Social Security. And this is an interesting article. I'll share some things with you and some thoughts on this. One of them being is that many Americans don't believe they will receive their full promised Social Security retirement income benefits, according to a Gallup poll. So think about that. A recent payroll tax suspension, of course, they talked about that, led to a warning by Social Security Administration that the trust fund could be depleted by 2023. Now that was a bit of an overshoot. The payroll tax thing was a temporary, and it's going to get repaid, so the effect is not going to be that drastic. But what is, when you think about the complexity and a lot of the confusion surrounding Social Security and what these trust funds, what are they exactly? Where's that money at? As I talked about the way that the Social Security system works, payroll taxes, taxes on Social Security benefits, all these kind of go in. The trust fund is basically these special issued treasury notes where the government, right, the federal government, has used the money coming in when there was excess coming in from Social Security payroll taxes and the like. They spent that money and issued these special treasuries to the Social Security Administration saying when you get into trouble, when in other words the payroll taxes are not enough to meet the amount of being paid out, then we can cash in some of these bonds to make up the difference. And in other words, the federal government's going to kick in the money. Where are they going to get the money? From other taxes we pay? From maybe raising additional debt? So this, and think of the debt that's already there, and what does that look like for the future? That's one of the reasons I was stressing inflation earlier on, right? Understanding inflation, because there's a likelihood that inflation will go up and go up considerably in coming years as we deal with this debt that has increased so much through these different stimulus packages that have been put out there, including the most recent, which is now talking about 1.9 trillion, I think, is what President Biden talked about. So what's that going to look like for you? So understanding Social Security and how it's tied in as well. So one of the things they're talking about is a possibility that Social Security could, in fact, run out of money, meaning simply when they're talking about running out, they're talking about the trust fund being depleted, requiring maybe a reduction in benefits based on currently what is being taxed by 25%. Okay, reduction in benefits by 25%. Most of us will not have to worry about that, younger in particular would, but the other part is the government has to act to fix it. All right, this is so important that they do something to shore it up. Now, this isn't the first time. Back in the 80s, we had a similar situation, and what did they do? They raised the retirement age, payroll taxes. That's when taxation of your benefits first started. Before that, Social Security benefits weren't subject to tax. At that time, they implemented a new rules, basically to where up to 50% of your benefits could be taxed at that time. And there's been some other fixes along the way, increases in Medicare, some means testing where you pay more based if you make more money. They then implemented a new rule back when Clinton was president where up to then 85% of your benefits can now be taxed based on your income. And these income numbers, by the way, that they use, the provisional income formula, hasn't changed, right, since implementing like almost 35 years ago. So 35 years ago. So think about that. We talk about inflation, okay, and the effect of inflation over that time frame. And you can see where that's a huge difference in terms of how many people were making, say, $40,000 a year back then compared to $40,000 today, 30 years later. Quite a bit different with inflation. So more people are having their Social Security benefit taxed and at higher, ever-increasing amounts. This helps with regard to Social Security. Some other things, the payroll tax, we have limitations. I think in 2021 it's, was it 140 something, I think? About 140,000, meaning that up to that point, everybody's paying that payroll tax, paying into Social Security. For those working for an employer, it's basically about 6% each, 6.2. that you as an employee pays and that your employer pays. They're talking, and up to the time you make $140,000. Now there's an additional Medicare tax, by the way, in addition to that of about 2.3, I think. So one of the things we see basically is that with these payroll taxes, them capping out, meaning if you make over 140, you no longer have to pay that Social Security tax. You pay it up to that amount, but then you don't have to keep paying it on the earnings you have over that. That's likely to change. That's one of the things they've talked about pretty consistently, is having raising the cap maybe to 200, or maybe taking a cap off and saying everybody pays in for whatever they make. That's one thing. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to talk to you, basically show you how you can get some planning done for yourself, but also with regard to the Social Security piece, understanding it a little more in depth, because it's important for how you plan around filling in the gaps that are going to be there. All right? First a break. Join me here. We'll be right back on the Retirement Report.